All right, we're live, and welcome to the Lovecraft Ezine podcast. My name is Mike Davis. I'm with Lovecraft Ezine, the Lovecraft Ezine guy, and our guest today is Adam Nevill. How you doing, Adam?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming. It's very late where you are, so I appreciate it. And just so we can get this on air, everybody has alcohol, right?
No.
Yep.
I know Adam does. Pete does. Yeah.
Well, I had alcohol.
You had alcohol.
Yeah,
I don't even have to ask Kelly if he has alcohol.
I had it, and now it's gone. So
this is to counteract my terror of public speaking.
My kids just brought me new alcohol. So,
That's
tonight's inebriation brought to you by Land Shark.
Delicious.
Yeah, that does sound tasty.
Land Shark from the Saturday Night Live skit. That's a funny skit. Okay. Anyway, let's do introductions. Philip, why don't you start?
Philip Fracassi. I'm an author and a screenwriter.
Pete
Rollick, author and research scientist.
Matt. Okay, good. Kelly.
Kelly Young, editor of Strange Eons magazine.
I think Matt froze or something. So
that's a great look for him.
Yeah. Adam, for a lot of people listening or watching this, I'm sure know who you are, but for those who don't, can you maybe introduce yourself for a few minutes before Philip interviews you?
Yeah, I'm a British writer of supernatural horror. That's about it.
You've written, is it 4 or 5 novels now?
Oh, it's 8.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, no, it's all right. There are 8 that have been published, and 2 collections of short stories, and I recently finished the 9th novel.
All right, and you wrote a book called The Ritual, which was made into a really good movie. I saw it. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you very much. I think the confusion with the books is only 4 of them were ever published in America with an American publisher.
Mm.
The other 4, America didn't want for some reason.
What do they know?
Yeah.
Okay, Phil.
Personally.
Well, that's a good question to start on because I have all of your novels and I haven't had trouble getting them. So it's interesting that your British publisher must distribute to the US.
There are certain quantities sold on export. What they do is when they publish a book, I mean, a publisher wants to try and sell as many foreign rights as they can. So you have the UK publication, and then usually after the Frankfurt Book Fair, they'll try and sell them into other territories. So for the US, they hold it back for a while, which is difficult because social media is international, and probably over half of my friends on Facebook and Twitter and so forth are in the US, and I promote the books in social media, and they're like, well, I can't find it here, and it's, well, there'll be a 12-month delay, and then the UK publisher will sell some on export, usually through the American Amazon. It's complicated.
I see.
So
of the 4, no, I was gonna say, so of the 4, which ones? Okay, so, and this is, I was gonna say this anyway, just to introduce you. I got, and I think I'm doing this in order. Banquet for the Damned was your first one, right? And
that's right.
Apartment 16, and then The Ritual, Last Days, House of Small Shadows, and then No One Gets Out Alive.
Yep.
Then Lost Girl, and then most recently Under a Watchful Eye. So,
very good.
Which of those 4 do not have U.S. publishers? If I could ask, because I like I said, I own them all, so I'm curious as to which ones.
Banquet for the Damned and Apartment 16
Mm-hmm.
Lost Girl, and Under a Watchful Eye. So the first two and the last two.
Oh, interesting.
I skipped.
Interesting. I have this very cool edition, and for the people who are listening in audio, of Banquet for the Damned, which is the PS edition.
Wow, that's beautiful.
With the
2004 by PS Publishing, and then it was reprinted years later in paperback. But that was my debut. That really was my start.
And this has an introduction by Ramsey Campbell.
Yeah.
Which is very cool. And if I'm ever wrong, feel free to correct me. But I think I read somewhere, or I was listening to you on another podcast or something. But I thought you said something about Banquet for the Damned initially being your college thesis. Is that, or master's thesis, or?
Yeah, I mean, in back in 1997, I left a job, I suppose, for want of a better word. I suppose it was a career in TV, and I went back to university to take a master's in creative writing. I've been writing for a while, professionally, but I identified the need for professional writers to look at my work and to try and get to the next level. With the actual writing, not the ideas or my imagination, that I didn't doubt, but I had serious reservations about my ability to express myself, and so I took this master's in creative writing. And back then there were very few. I think there were 6 in the UK, and I began writing Banquet for the Damned in my first week after I arrived in St Andrews in Scotland. And the first 20,000 words I submitted as my thesis for the masters. And then I sort of finished. It took me, I think, 3 or even between 3 and 4 years to complete the book. And then there was another sort of 3 years. I mean, at that time, horror was the genre that dare not speak its name in British publishing, other than the usual suspects who had established careers in the 70s and the 80s. There just wasn't any new horror being published. So it was probably the worst decision you could possibly make as a new writer, to write a long, detailed horror novel. But it's what I wanted to write. But Pete Crowther, who owns PS Publishing, it's odd. I wrote a short story when I was in St Andrews as well, and I showed it to a friend of mine who was publishing some other work. He was an editor in London, and just out of the blue, I received an email from Ramsey Campbell, who I'd read and revered, but had never had any contact with. And he said that he'd read this short story of mine and would like to publish it in a collection, Gathering the Bones. And my friend, the editor, had passed it on to someone, and it had been passed on to someone else who'd shown it to Ramsey, who emailed me. And while I had Ramsey's ear, I just said, is there anywhere I can send this huge novel I've written? It's an homage to M.R. James and the classic age of the British ghost story. It was my homage to it. Prior to this, I'd sent it to every agent that accepted fiction in the Writers and Artists Yearbook at that time. You had to send it to an agent, and they'd all rejected the introductory letter. They wouldn't read a word of it. They just rejected mine. Yeah. So I'd spent 3 years writing this book and rewriting it, and I couldn't even get an agent to read a page of it. So how was I then going to get a publisher to see it? So it wasn't the most auspicious start in horror, I have to say. But I did ask Ramsey when we were emailing about this story that was going into Gathering the Bones, because Ramsey brought me into print really as a horror writer, and he said try Pete at PS. You know, he was at that time, still is, Ramsey's UK publisher. So I sent the manuscript to Pete Crowther, and at the time I was working as a porter in the West End. It was my kind of old school writer's job, and I think it was 3 days after I sent it, I got a phone call at work from Pete Crowther, who said, "I'm going to publish your book." So from finishing it to then, it was quite a circuitous route. And there were 4 years between finishing the book and it coming out in that hardback small press edition.
So this edition is the actual original first edition.
There was 700 printed,
right?
With the Edward Miller cover and Ramsey's introduction. Ramsey was very kind to give me an introduction as well. So he brought me into print as a short story writer and more or less as a horror writer as well, because I'd hit a brick wall. I didn't really know about small presses then, and I Googled and what have you. I think there was leisure horror, and that was about it. And I'd read a couple of the books, and I could see straight away that mine would have been probably unsuitable, not least for its length. But then that was my start, and the book came out, and it was quite popular. I suppose amongst my peers, and it was Ramsey again said, "You must come to FantasyCon," which is the annual convention of the British Fantasy Society. And I went along, and that was it. Kind of joined that community and met a lot of other writers, because at the time I didn't know any writers. I certainly didn't know anyone who was writing horror. That book really came out of a vacuum or a void. It was just my own personal interest and taste in reading that led me to write it.
Ramsey's a nice guy.
Oh, absolutely.
He's a very helpful guy. No, I think we all are, Philip. Adam, can you turn your speakers down just a bit? That might fix the problem.
Turn my speaker down?
Yeah, I think our voices are echoing back, getting some feedback.
How's that?
Testing.
I think that's fine.
I think that fixed it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sorry.
No, it's great.
No worries. Google Hangouts is moody.
It's because I'm so metal. You get feedback when you talk to me.
Right.
Just as an aside before Philip starts again, I'm on your Amazon page and I see Apartment 16, but yeah, I don't see Banquet for the Dead at all on Amazon. So,
on the US one. And if I look at Amazon US, I'm looking at something different. So, I mean, the people who have acquired all of my books, thank you, Philip, for getting all 8, that I know in the US tend to use Book Depository for the ones that were never published in America.
Yeah, I don't even know, honestly, where. I mean, like the PS edition I got directly, I bought actually used, from bought it from a collector, and then then I have these these are the Pan editions, right? These paperbacks.
Yes, Pan Macmillan UK.
Pan Macmillan UK. So I thought these were on Amazon, but Lost Girl also I brought Lost Girl as well. This one I thought I picked up off Amazon as well, but I'm not sure where I got them. But I might have bought them from I might even have bought them from Amazon.uk, which is I think something that US people can do. Is just go to Amazon.co.uk, right, and then just ship them from the UK.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons I started my own imprint for my short fiction and published my 2 collections through Ritual Limited, was to circumnavigate this sort of territory issue that you get with the big international publishers, where they hold it in one country and try and sell the rights elsewhere, and then release a few copies on export, just to get around that availability issue.
Yeah, and that was actually going to be, I was going to ask you about Ritual Limited. But before I get into that, I wanted to ask you, and again, I may have my facts wrong, but did you, prior to becoming a full-time writer, did you work for Virgin Publishing?
I did. I was the fiction editor for
Right.
5 years, and the day the company was bought by Random House, which is Random House Penguin, who just sort of decimated the company and got rid of us all over about 9 months. And I think I was the second to last person to get the white envelope and to be made redundant. But 2 hours before I got the bullet, I got my big break with horror, a 2-book deal with Pan Macmillan. This was
good timing.
2009. And it was the Ritual and Apartment 16 were actually in an auction. There were 4 of the big publishers in the UK that wanted them. So it was all on that day. My life changed, and this whole new direction occurred. One door closed, and the one thing I'd aspired to for such a long time, against all the odds, came to pass. And it was at that time, I don't know if you remember, but it was around 2008 in the UK, where horror briefly became the new black again in traditional publishing. There were a couple of new writers like Christopher Ransom who'd had a big hit with a horror novel over here, The Birthing House, and suddenly horror publishers were thinking, horror, is that selling now? Have we got anything on submission? But very few people had been writing it because it was completely out of vogue and persona non grata. And I'd had a novel on circulation for a year. This was 5 years after Banquet for the Damned came out. I'd spent that time writing Apartment 16 and The Ritual, and still nothing really had changed in publishing. And I had an agent by then who kept saying, don't give it to a small press. Hold fire. I've got a feeling there are some grass shoots coming through for horror. Just be patient, which was really good advice. And then publisher Quercus in the UK, who published The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, suddenly made an offer on Apartment 16. It had been out there for a year. And then, my agent called around all the other people he'd submitted it to, who found it in a pile under a desk and blew the dust off it and read it. And suddenly 4 of them wanted that book. And I said, well, I've nearly finished this book, The Ritual, which is very different to Apartment 16. Let's throw that in the ring as well and see if we can get a 2-book deal. And three publishers went to auction on those 2 books. So after, I'd been writing horror for 15 years, and other than small press short stories and Banquet for the Damned, which was published by PS Publishing, that was a small press at the time, although they're much bigger now. They're almost like a medium-sized trade publisher. Suddenly to have gone from all of those years, I'd given up that, my books would ever cross over to the next level and go with a bigger publisher. Suddenly I was in this auction situation that was even in the trade publishing papers, and Pan Macmillan won that. And I really liked the editor there, Julie Crisp, who used to work there. She doesn't anymore. She's an agent now. And I suppose the rest was history. And the first 2 books did very well, particularly Apartment 16. I mean, they were stocked in a lot of high street bookstores, and there were twice as many of them back in 2010, I think, as there are now. A lot has happened since then. So it wasn't published as like a big deal or a big frontlist book, but they had really strong covers, and they got word of mouth very quickly, and they went into reprints. And that really enabled me then to get another 2-book deal, and so on and so forth, which has led me to being able to write 8 books. But the first 3, Banquet, Apartment 16, and The Ritual, I think took me 10 years to complete around full-time work.
Right. And then it was No One Gets Out Alive and House of Small Shadows were St. Martin's Press. Is that right?
Yes.
In the US.
They came in and took The Ritual, and that did well in America the first time it came out, and then took Last Days, and then House of Small Shadows and No One Gets Out Alive.
Oh, those are, I mean, it's such an amazing, I don't know if I have a favorite, but if I had leaned toward a favorite, it'd be House of Small Shadows because of the creepy house vibe and the puppets and all that sort of stuff. But I hope that the other books that you have, the new book that you have, get U.S. distribution, because I think I think there's a huge market in the U.S. obviously for what you're doing. And it actually made me think while you were talking, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but it almost seems to me that there's more of a market in the UK for horror than there is in the US. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it often feels that way. I know a lot of writers in the UK don't cross over, and there's not that many horror writers really in the mainstream in the US, aside from, to your, the way you said it, the obvious candidates. So what do you think about that? Is that something you think is true or false?
I tend to think the opposite. That you have a much bigger market for horror. I mean, that there's more of you for a start. I mean, there are more people, and it seems to me that the way horror's published in the US, you have far more small presses.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to completely vanish from traditional publishing catalogs. I think what's happened in both territories is horror, through necessity, really, to survive, has had to migrate more to the indie sector. It comes in and out of vogue every 15 years in the UK. You'll get 3 years. I think 93 was the last time there were a lot of horror novels. There was a lot of horror fiction published by mainstream publishers, and then there was almost nothing beyond Stephen King, Anne Rice, Dean Koontz, etc., Clive Barker, James Herbert, until around 2008, and then it went off the boil again, I think, in around 2013, 14. Publishers, it's very corporate now, and I think that they're told to publish bestsellers. So at the moment, it's post Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl. We have this kind of grip-lit thriller craze, and that seems to be all I see in the charts of W.H. Smith's, and certainly in supermarkets where most paper books are sold. And I think because of that, because of the horror continually going in and out of fashion with the big international publishers, it has developed this wonderful underground indie market that has the more sort of literary weird stuff all the way down to the more, dare I say it, kind of pulpier, more commercial 80s horror. And most of the books that are published and most of the authors writing seem to be in that indie sector now, and it's all online. It seems to have bypassed traditional publishing and the traditional book trade and bookshops, and it seems to be ebooks gave it an enormous boost. Seems to be fairly healthy, judging by the sheer number of books that are coming out and multi-author anthologies. It seems to be in a good place, and it's no longer dependent on the fashions of traditional or corporate publishing.
Right.
So Philip, just to point out, you were wrong about that, and Adam missed a golden opportunity. He should have just yelled at you and said, "You're absolutely have this wrong. You don't know what you're talking about."
Well, no, it's a common thing. Sort of, I think you guys look over the Atlantic and think, you know, in the UK, it's the sort of
Yeah.
horror's has got a much healthier scene, and then we look over to your side and think, God, all those small presses and so many good authors coming through. You've got such a great, you know, market and environment for horror over there. But I think, you know, social media and the internet has changed, and it's just become like a big international market where everything can be available. There is no excuse now for, you know, an indie publisher in the US to publish a really good collection of stories by a new writer and to not publish it in the UK through Ingram or Amazon CreateSpace. All you're doing is uploading the file, and it's print on demand. Everything can be available everywhere. Where there is Amazon, where there is Ingram, the books can be available.
As an indie publisher myself, I could care less where the authors come from, and I send the books everywhere in the world. Amazon's very helpful with that.
Well, I saw Philip's new novella Shiloh, which you've published on Amazon UK. I've ordered it.
That doesn't ring a bell. It doesn't ring a bell at all. Did we publish a book of yours, Philip?
It was a small one, so that might be why it slipped your mind. It was just
all right. Sorry, Adam. Go ahead.
Yeah, let Adam keep talking about my book, Mike. Why are you interrupting?
Well, it's available over here already at a very reasonable price. You know, I haven't got to hunt around and order it from Amazon.com and pay, you know, lose a kidney to cover the postage. The print on demand technology, I think, has really improved, and everything can be available.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Shiloh, I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that you just went to Amazon UK and bought it.
I did.
Okay,
which I'm guessing either you've sold stock or it's a POD.
It's a POD.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, it's interesting you said that about print on demand, because this is another an opportunity for you to tell me how wrong I am, and I would appreciate. Okay. And I would, not you, Mike, and
sorry,
and I would love to know. But I think the print on demand. One of the things that struck me is the print on demand, because I was a small publisher in the early aughts, and that was during the time when you would literally they'd make the plates, and you'd have 2,000 boxes, 2,000 books in boxes in your garage, and you'd have to move them. And you were very motivated as a publisher to move them because you had all the books, you'd pre-purchased this run of books. And I wonder if now there are instances that you would agree or disagree with. I feel like there are now instances where publishers are, especially on the indie side, are taking advantage of the fact that they don't have to put up that large upfront fee to pre-print all the books. The downside of that seems to be that they're not especially worried as maybe an author would like them to be to move those books. In other words, I'm wondering if the marketing has suffered because print on demand doesn't really, there's no alarm bells to make your money back, because you don't really have a huge initial investment. Do you ever sense that or see that in some of the kind of mid-list publishers or the guys who are using POD?
I think at the moment it's being used by solo authors, indie authors who are self-publishing. They seem to really have embraced it. And then small presses. I've only come across one kind of arts publisher. I bought a couple of novels written by a French author, and they arrived, and I was actually quite surprised to see Amazon CreateSpace credited on the final page. And I thought, this is a literary publisher now that's using POD. They've uploaded the files, and they don't have to hold any stock. I mean, with the two collections I did them in 4 formats. So the ebook and the POD, I don't need to have any stock, and it's available everywhere where there's Ingram or there's Amazon. And then Journal Stone did an audiobook. The hardback, I did it traditionally. I paid a printer. I went through all the text design, cover design, chose the paper and what have you, and I had a limited edition hardback done. And I paid for that 400 copies of the hardback, and I store them. I store them at home. Fortunately, there aren't many left. I've sold most of them.
I was going to say,
but
I'm surprised you have any left. I have both of them. They're beautiful.
Oh, thank you. But in terms of marketing, I think mid-list on a traditional publisher. For that reason precisely, it's become quite a miserable place to be, because often marketing doesn't amount to more than the publisher sending out review copies.
Right.
Their resources, their time, their effort, their investment tends to go on their big front list writers. So increasingly, I think you're seeing authors migrate from the mid list to self-publishing.
Yeah.
The other problem that you highlighted, I think, because now that the technology to produce books electronically or in print on demand is so much cheaper and has been completely democratized and is available to all, we've got this discovery problem in that it seems to me almost everybody now has got author after their name on Facebook, and there are so many books coming out. I mean, I was reading recently that there were 800,000 ISBNs given out in the US for this year. That doesn't even include all the books published straight on Amazon that don't need an ISBN. And I thought, as a rough figure, there's probably a new book for every 300 people in America come out this year. There's more authors and books coming out than there are readers. And I think horror has suffered from that, as probably all genres have. How do you make a book stand out? How do you distinguish it? How do you give it any kind of presence when you look at the weight of those numbers? But I think what kind of counteracts that slightly is horror has a very good community, through conventions and podcasts and websites like yours, and the kind of peer camaraderie we all have in social media. And we all recommend each other's books and so on and so forth. That helps to a certain extent. But I just think generally in publishing, be it in horror or in any other field or genre, we're just in a very interesting time where there are just too many books.
Can I jump in on that question for you,
Sure.
Phil, as an indie writer myself, or sorry, as an indie publisher myself? I compare it to websites. These days, anybody can have a website, right? Because they're easy to make. It didn't used to be that way. You used to have to know HTML and so forth. But now, you can go to WordPress.com, you can create a website or wherever. But is it a good website? Does it get a lot of traffic? So equally so, anyone can create a book these days. But is it well written? Is it packaged well? Does the cover make it stand out? Does the cover, scream, pick me up virtually and see what I'm about? And as a publisher, does the publisher have the reach? So
also, was the text even designed, or was it sort of put through a grinder on Smashwords or Amazon or something?
Mm-hmm.
Text design is it's a real craft, and it takes a long time to get it right. But I think the quality immediately pops out. But I think the indie scene and a lot of indie authors are becoming more professional, and it's getting harder to distinguish between a self-published book and a traditionally published book, and it's changing all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think quality is I think the old can't judge a book by its cover has kind of become a saying of the past, because I think a lot of people are judging books by their covers now, because to your point, Adam, because there's such a flood of content. I think it's your first look into, did this person care enough about their book to do it correctly? In other words, if you're going to invest in it, you want to make sure that the creators of the book invested in it. And I think that a cover can go a long way to saying, okay, well, I like the cover, so now I'm ready to go to the next level. I'll download the sample. And if I like the sample, okay, now I'm ready to go to the next level, and I'll buy the book. And I think that's
exactly
the only way
right.
only way you can do it, because otherwise, to Adam's point, there's just too much to sift through. And I think a lot of it is recommendations as well. Again, Adam mentioned this, in social media is such a big player in that, because nowadays it's like a doctor. You want it referred by somebody you trust, and I think that goes a long way as well. And I wanted to talk, while we're kind of bouncing on this, I really wanted to get into, because I'm very interested in it, into Ritual Limited and into the 2 collections, Hasty for the Dark and Some Will Not Sleep. You did those limited edition hardcovers, which is what I have, which are the ones you put the signed cards in, which is really cool. And they're going, to your point, they're gorgeous. The production quality is very high, and the layout and everything. They're nice objects to have, especially for me as a collector. And but they also have I thought it was very newsletter. I think you launched it along with your new website a couple of years ago. Maybe it was 3 years ago now. But and I remember signing up for it, and you were giving away one of your books. You're giving away your book of I think it's like a book of essays with people who subscribe to the newsletter, essays and what have you. And I think there was, so Before You Sleep is 3 stories, and then Before You Wake is also 3 stories. But then one of those is the ones that you got when you signed up for the newsletter, right?
Before You Sleep is a free book. Should be on every online retailer. That's right. 3 short stories from Some Will Not Sleep, the first collection. Hasty for the Dark was my later stories, and Before You Wake is 3 stories from that collection. So Before You Wake,
they're like samplers.
Yeah, the 2 free books. Cries from the Crypt was, I wanted to give something away of value from the website, also as an incentive for people to sign up to the newsletter. But from when I first started, way back in those Banquet for the Damned days, I looked at all of the material I'd written for people's websites, from writing about horror to interviews and so on and so forth. And I counted it, and it was something like 200,000 words I'd written for horror websites. Nearly all of these websites have now gone. Some of them came and went within a year. And I thought, but I still put a lot of time into writing this material. Unfortunately, it's something I don't have time to do now. But I took about 80,000 words of that, the non-fiction, put a couple of short stories in there as well, and also the chapters I'd taken out of novels during drafts that never appeared in the final novels, and packaged it all together. So, if people were interested in my books, there were missing chapters, short stories, and lots of non-fiction about the books and about horror in general. And it proved very popular. You get, it's an ebook, but a free full-length book if you sign up to the newsletter.
Let me just point out real quick for those listening, it's Adam LG Nevill, NEVILL.com. AdamLGNevill.com. Do I have that right?
That's right.
And right there on the main page, people can sign up for that. And I did link that in the show notes as well. So,
yeah, and thank you for that.
Sure.
But connected to what Phil was saying, I mean, I'd kind of come to this situation in my own publishing where, a couple of books were just really underpublished. They were really undercooked. I wasn't happy at all with the way that they were put out there. There were all kind of things going on at the publisher, internal schisms and what have you. And one of my books, I'm not sure it ever appeared in a bookshop over here in the UK, which was one of these reasons I decided to build a better author platform and to take a bit of control myself and to get a new website and to start a mailing list and to try and find some new readers, you know, by giving away some free fiction and so forth. So I was kind of learning from the indie sector and the more successful indie authors. I took a lot of courses and webinars and thought, you know, how can I kind of fireproof myself a bit as an author so I'm not completely and exclusively dependent upon, you know, very capricious traditional publishing that blows hot and cold on horror. Can I take advantage of the new opportunities, the new technology? And I pretty much took all of 2016 out. I didn't write anything new, and I studied indie publishing. And bit by bit, I put together those 4 editions of my first collection, and then did a second collection the following year so that I wouldn't forget it all. But it's one of the best things that I've done, and it was really liberating as well. You know, I thought here is another opportunity. You know, this is a safety net for me as an author. And the first book, I was genuinely shocked because I thought it's a collection of short stories. Although I have a traditional publisher, they would never publish a collection of my short stories. I don't think there is a traditional publisher that would have considered it. And although lots of small presses had asked me for my first collection, I thought I'm gonna keep it back and see about doing it myself in my own way, which is also, I think, a good business decision to make. And I thought, well, you know, there has been a revival in single author collections in horror, and we've seen some amazing ones come out over the last 10 years. But it's still going to be a niche market, and most of the interest in horror is probably in novels. But I confounded. My low expectations were confounded by just how well that first book has done. And, you know, I won't go into the actual figures, but I outsold my last 3 novels from a big international publisher with effectively a self-published collection of short stories. I think I published it well. You know, I didn't leave anything to chance. I did a couple of launches. I advertised on Amazon. I wasn't allowed to advertise on Amazon because they told me the cover was too scary.
Oh yeah, it is
Really
creepy.
It was too disturbing. That was the word. And I advertised on Facebook and so forth, and took advantage of Amazon promotions, and just did all of these different things that traditional publishers just don't do or don't have the time to do for their mid-list authors. And that was a real eye-opener for me. It was a real kind of wake-up. I thought, with a collection of short stories, how is it possible? It shouldn't be possible that I can outsell some of my novels, which, you know, admittedly weren't published that well. So it was hard work, but I was very encouraged by the results. And it really was an insight into how the whole kind of indie sector in horror has developed and become popular.
And
Sorry,
you
that was
had
a really long answer, wasn't it? And I don't know if I even answered the question. This is one of my problems.
No,
I was just going to say, as a former editor and working on publishing, you had the experience to do it right. So
yeah, I knew the managing editorial side, which was copy editing and proofreading and design proofreads and how you put a cover together, cover copy, etc. But I didn't know book production at all, really, because editors, you're so far removed from book production. So the whole ebook print on demand thing, putting together a hardback, I had to learn more or less from scratch. And Brian Showers of Swan River Press, who are a terrific publisher of the strange, esoteric, and fantastic in Dublin, Ireland, Brian mentored me on the hardback, so I didn't completely ruin it. But I mean, pretty much anything that could have gone wrong on the 3 editions I did, the ebook, paperback, and hardback, did go wrong. But you can, you just keep going at it again and again and again until you're happy with your final files. And I felt a bit of pressure because, I'm traditionally published. I worked in publishing for 11 years. There was no excuse for me not to produce good books in each of the editions. I just couldn't afford to blow up. And also I invested an enormous amount of money into the company, the platform, the training, the new website, and what have you. But it was a good investment, I think.
Adam, can I ask, what attracted you to horror in the first place, and why do you write horror novels as opposed to mystery or anything else? What attracts you to horror?
For me, it started when I was a boy. My dad read to my brother and I most evenings, probably up until we were 11, and we had everything from The Hobbit, C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, H.G. Wells, but it was the stories of M.R. James that he read to us when we were younger, which absolutely terrified me, but absolutely captivated my imagination as well. And he had a big library of horror, even the Lovecraft in Arkham House editions. And as I got older, I started reading his horror myself, the classics, Machen, Blackwood, Walter Delamere, Wakefield, Lovecraft when I was a teenager. And he was always on hand to recommend things. And, he just had a shelf of August Derleth's multi-author anthologies published in the 60s and 70s. And so I just had all of this horror at my disposal. And I read a lot, and of all the different fields and genres that I read, it was always supernatural horror that appealed more than anything else to my imagination. And I always saw it as the perfect vehicle, really. I could always write about the things that matter to me, the things that I care about, as well as writing horror stories.
I think in the House of Small Shadows, you said something like, this is going to be a bad paraphrasing, but the protagonist is wondering about horror and, her place in the universe and so forth. And she's wondering where the horror begins, the fear begins, and the awe, where the fear ends and the awe begins. They're kind of the same sometimes. So I thought that was interesting.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's that idea of Arthur Machen's and Lovecraft's, that, this sublime of terror that you can experience. It's not just fear, there's also wonder and awe in it. It's just probably the most powerful, transporting emotion or mental experience we can have. And it's kind of the holy grail, I think, in horror, to evoke that, if you can do it with. And it's something that I certainly always aspire to do, whether I do it or not. House of Small Shadows is an interesting one as well, because I'm very flattered that it's Philip's favorite, and that you both mentioned it, because it's my weirdest book, and it's probably the least favorite amongst readers. It really split.
I'm going to have my wife read it, because she's terrified of dolls and marionettes and so forth. So I think it'd be good for her to read it.
Oh, yeah. People love it or they hate it, but that was one. The kind of things that I remembered from my childhood that frightened me or kind of enchanted me, I wanted to try and get them into a story before I forgot what those things were, before my memory dimmed any more than it had done. So it's quite a surreal, quite a personal book. And a lot of people say that, it doesn't make sense at the end.
That it's a personal book. What you just said right there, that it's personal. You wrote in House of Small Shadows, he lost his faith. I wrote this down, not just in God, but in men, in society, in humanity. His loss of faith was colossal. You could say that it was total. That really hit home for me. Is that part of that personal that you're talking about?
I think exploring that idea imaginatively. The one thing I try and do with every book is I've always done it right from the very first short story is to go as deep as I can, into my own memory and imagination. And I find the things there that I've always found very affecting and that I've remembered, and they might be really grotesque, they might be incredibly bleak, they might seem, absurd, but that's the kind of core that I write from. And I think, if I go deep enough and I find these images and I find these ideas and I bring them out into a story, oddly enough, those are the things that tend to resonate with readers, and readers seem to remember. So I always, if people ever ask me for advice about what to write in terms of horror, I always think, don't try and copy the established successful authors. Go deep, and no matter how kind of ashamed you are of what you find down there, or how silly it may seem or ridiculous, you're probably onto something there, and you'd be writing more authentically or more truthfully. We all have our own personal horrors, and maybe I should temper this and not get people to have terrible flashbacks into trauma, but I think, to write truthfully, and to write effectively in horror, and to really transport a reader, I think you have to drill down. I've always done it, and it's why I think writing my books is I find it quite exhausting, and I almost have the equivalent of a 1,000-yard stare at the end. Particularly some of them, like Lost Girl and No One Gets Out Alive. No One Gets Out Alive was particularly tough to write, and left me with a slight kind of concussion. And there's been moments in all of the books. There was one in The Ritual where, Luke reaches a similar state of despair as M.H. Mason, who you just quoted from in House of Small Shadows, where Luke just decides at one point in the book that he's had enough. He just wants it to end now. He wants to die, and he hopes it's oblivion. And when I wrote that scene and I really imagined it, and I kind of put myself in that situation imaginatively, I remember saying to my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, I wonder if I've just done myself permanent harm having to imagine this scene. I almost had I really kind of shook myself up, and then I've done it again in most books. I mean, what I made myself imagine in Lost Girl was very distressing, but these are the things that touch readers, and I think they can sense if they're authentic or not. You're writing about what matters to you, what has meaning to you, and there's a chance that it might mean something to somebody else that reads the book, as opposed to, I guess, writing in a very kind of conscious conscious way to entertain or to just emulate the effects of things that you found in other books or in films. I think for horror to really resonate and to endure in a reader's memory, I think a writer's got to go a bit deeper than that. Dan Simmons had a really interesting. He wrote an essay about writing, and I always remembered one of his phrases about what elevates fiction is the writer's innate strangeness. You know, you've got to tap into that. Your innate strangeness, something really that's, I suppose, unique to your experience, observations, imagination. You know, if you can distill that and find a way of expressing it, that's what makes fiction stand out.
Our friend Joe Pulver calls it bleeding on the page.
Yeah.
I have a question. It's kind of down a different tack. You've been successful in seeing some of your work taken into a different medium. So like we're talking about The Ritual, which we have all watched here. We thought it was an amazingly effective movie.
Right.
But I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the whole experience, like who approached you and how much input you had and what you thought of the final product and maybe what else you're doing in film.
Yeah. It was a book that was it was under option with quite a big company who had made some good films for about 18 months, and they wanted to renew at the end of that period. But Imaginarium also showed an interest and invited me along to their studios in Ealing in London. And I went along, and I was astonished because, you know, everyone I met in that company, it's a small production company owned by Jonathan Cavendish and Andy Serkis. And it's kind of like the performance capture facility house. But they'd all read it. Everyone had read it and was really enthusiastic about the book. So I said to my film agent, you know, I got a really good feeling about these people and I like them, and let's move the option across. And I think 3 years after that, it became a film, and they were brilliant to deal with. I wrote the source material. I can't take any credit for the film. Somebody else wrote the screenplay. I was shown the screenplays, and I did make some comments, but you know, they had the experience and expertise and skill as filmmakers, and I didn't, and you know, was wise enough to let go of any kind of head film I had of how it should be filmed. I mean, of course, I imagined it as a film. I deliberately wrote the novel in a filmic or cinematic way, really to see if I could do it, if I could, in some ways, imitate the horror film within a novel. And it's probably no surprise that was the first of my books to be made. But they were very good to work with, and you know, they assembled such a good team. From Keith Thompson, who made The Creature, to Joe, who wrote the screenplay, the director of photography, Andrew Shulkins, made it look beautiful. David Bruckner, incredibly talented director. I didn't have any complaints, you know. It's a different medium. It's 90 minutes of screen time. My novel is over 400 pages. David said to me when I first met him that, you know, you've got 4 films in this book. You know, this is going to be an interpretation of the book. And I think they maintain the spirit of the book, and all of the characters were pretty much intact, as was the setting, as was the kind of suggestions of pagan horror and folk horror in it. I thought they did a terrific job, and it wasn't a huge budget. This was at the time a fairly small British production company and a modest budget, but they made such a good film, and it did well on the screen over here, and then was snapped up by Netflix, and has been incredibly popular. So I had a very good experience and was very fortunate.
For a limited budget, for a bigger budget, that creature was just incredible, done perfectly, I thought.
That's
So,
great to hear.
I'm not the only one. Kelly, you had a question, right?
Yeah, this was along the very same lines, and you answered a little bit of this. I guess I would wonder. I just finished watching again for the third time the girl with all the gifts, and I realized that the screenplay was written by the author of the book, Mike Carey, and I thought, man, this book, the movie definitely deviates from the book, but it's so great, and he knew what to cut and what not to cut. I was curious for The Ritual, which I loved the book and I loved the movie, what you thought of them. They kind of changed your third act a bit. Was that something that was originally something you had any interest in writing a screenplay for, and or if it was just completely taken out of your hands, the project was sold, and that was the understanding was that somebody else was going to write it. And then playing on that, do you have any interest in writing screenplays based on your stuff, or maybe something completely original for film?
I do have an interest now. I didn't know how to write a screenplay. Most of my books have been under option. Some of them have had 3, and nothing has happened. But I've actually never been asked by no production company has said, do you want to have a shot at the script? And my film agent advised against it as well. She said, if you ever do have a go at an original screenplay. But since it was, for me, it was such a kind of peak experience, the making of the film, the development of it, the making of it, then the reaction when it came out. I'm a huge film fan as it is, and I kind of decided then, if there are future adaptations of my work, or I do produce an original screenplay at some point in the future, I would like more involvement. I would like to be a part of it. I'm not daunted by it now. I certainly don't. I wouldn't run before I could walk. It's something that I'm kind of studying now, and I'm looking into for the future. It's something I'd like to be involved in. But, up until this point, and until the point of that film, it was probably better that I didn't interfere at all and let the professionals, take care of it all.
Well, then, with
Do I
that
have
in
to
mind,
hear about the girl with all the gifts on every podcast,
yeah, until you watch it.
every episode?
It is
I
such a
have
good
seen
movie,
film.
Mike. You have to watch that movie.
I'm okay. Yeah, I'm going to watch it. I'm going to watch it.
But Adam, then with a hit film like this, and I don't actually know if it was a hit or not, but I know that over here, especially in our group, in our genre, everybody just seemed to really love it. Does this now change things with the other books, the options and stuff like that? Has everything been snapped up now?
There were a few others that are in development anyway, in some stage of development, and there has been interest in the ones that had come out of option. So yeah, it's in terms of that, in terms of interest from production companies, it's been a really good 6 months, and I hope that at some time in the future, something else will finally be filmed. A couple of the other sort of options it has and so forth at the moment, I'm forbidden to talk about. you know, I've had to sign confidentiality agreements and what have you, which I've done before, and you know, I manage my expectations. You know, these are huge collaborative efforts involving so much money, and so much can go wrong. And I mean, I know Philip works in the industry, and even, you know, the Ritual with Imaginarium, it had funding almost right from the beginning, and I'd always thought that once you got funding, the film gets made. But it's just not that simple, because, you know, your cast or your director and, you know, the key people involved in the film might be attached to 20 other projects, and you know, if one of those gets the trigger, people go off and make those, and then you're waiting for somebody to come back, and then somebody else goes, and so the manpower situation, the personnel situation. When I looked at all the variables that filmmakers face, I honestly thought, how does anything get made? You know, and it was right down to the wire with this one, because Imaginarium were very busy. They've made the Jungle Book for adults, the Mowgli film. They're involved in Planet of the Apes and Star Wars, and you know, all of these big budget films. They made another film. They got all kinds of things in production. You know, that there is a slate where the film has to be made within a certain time, because they've got so many other things around it. And you know, this seems to be quite a universal thing. So you know, you can get it all lined up, and it's all, you think it's going to happen, and it might not. You know, I've had some incredible meetings with interesting and famous producers and people in the past, and you come out of them thinking, wow, you know, my whole life is about to change, and then nothing comes of it. They're involved in something else, they get enthusiastic about something else, or you just don't even know. Just nothing happens. You know, there's no post-mortem that's shared with you. So you know, I manage my expectations, but Imaginarium were really good. They had a real feel for the book. David had such a vision for the film, and a couple of you mentioned the monster, and you know, that sense of being in the presence of a god, be it a minor deity and a forgotten one in a corner of a Scandinavian forest. But he really did try and create that sense of awe, you know, terror and wonder, particularly the bit when because I hadn't seen the monster. The first time I saw it was at the cast and crew screening, and I was a little nervous at the script stage. I was saying things like, you know, are you really going to show it? Oh yeah, we're going to show it, trust us. And then that part where it rises up, it stands up,
yeah, that was awesome,
to be worshipped.
Yeah.
I got a real kind of genuine sense of awe in the cinema, and I thought that, you know, they've done it. They've pulled off. That's such a hard thing to do, and it could so easily have backfired or gone wrong. But David and Keith and the team that worked on that, I thought that was a very special moment in a horror film.
Because many times when you show the monster, it's disappointing, and it was not here, you know. So
it has to be one of my top 5 cinematic monsters.
Absolutely. It was just the right amount of time to see it. Just enough for you to go, what the fuck am I looking at?
exactly.
And the fact that I actually have gone to the website where they've done the reveal of the small model and gone over it, it's just gorgeous. I want one.
Let me just
oh, he's got one.
Oh man.
Oh no, I wish I had, but where is it? Here we go. Here we go. Keith, who designed it, sent me a print he's created, signed with the pencil.
Oh wow.
I wish he drew the original creature design. And when David and the producers saw it, they, you know, because I think he'd done several, they were like, this guy.
That's
Hey,
great.
Adam, can you
So
shift it over a bit towards you? Like that way. Yeah, there we go. There's the head.
Oh, if you're just listening to this on the podcast, you're missing out.
You better watch the video.
I may have to get a screenshot of this for the listeners.
I mean,
That's cool.
I'm a Lovecraftian, and you know, that is something I would worship. Yeah.
Oh, I nearly knelt in the cinema.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Lovecraft. I mean,
I love the part where I love the
my
part
God.
where he makes him kneel too. You know, he's like, no, don't stand up.
Yeah.
Adam, who are some of your favorite writers working today?
I have a lot actually. I read a great deal. So I made a bit of a list in case this came up. I mean, in terms of authors who have really impressed me in the last few years, I've really been enjoying Brian Hodges' stuff.
Yeah.
I think his last collection, Picking the Bones, but then he's had 4 or 5 that Ellen Datlow has reprinted in the year's best horror, which I think is an excellent series to kind of encapsulate the last decade and all of the new voices that have come through and all of the new things that people have been doing in horror. You know, I suppose literary horror, the writing is of such a good standard. He's done 3 or 4 really good kind of cosmic horror Lovecraftian stories that she's reprinted. So I think I'm looking forward to his next collection. If this is a vein he's been tapping recently. One I read recently, I loved, by a British novelist called Sarah Waters. I don't know if she's published in the US. A ghost story, kind of a classic British ghost story, set in a period house. That's called The Little Stranger. That really impressed me. Stephen J. Clark is another interesting English author who tends to write for small presses. His new book is out with Zagava. It's called The Feathered Bough. I read his last 2 books. I thought they were terrific. And he's an artist as well, and he illustrates his books. Reggie Oliver, always the British writer of strange stories. And, you know, if you like M.R. James and Robert Aikman, Reggie seems to, you know, combine the qualities of those 2 writers. Very fine writer. Frank Tallis, or F.R. Tallis, is another British novelist who's worth, don't know if you, I think he's had at least 1 book published in the US, maybe more, but his novels, The Sleep Room and The Passenger, I recommend. Nina Allen, also very good, a British writer. And then, you know, Nathan Ballingrud, I look forward to anything that Nathan writes. Gemma Files as well, Canadian author. And then, you know, John Langan, Michael Wehunt. I never know how you pronounce his surname. Am I right on?
Yeah, Wehunt. That's correct.
Okay, brilliant. Matthew Bartlett, I've enjoyed. Philip as well. I loved Philip's novella Saculina, the one set on the sea. I thought that would make a terrific film. I was going to ask you: is that under option, Philip?
It is not, Adam. Thank you for mentioning it. It is widely available.
Okay.
No,
I did. Screenplay.
I did recently option the last novella in my collection, though, Mandala. So that's exciting. Yeah, for a director who's done some work in television and film. So we're excited about that one.
Brilliant. Well done. Actually, something I read last night that I thought was very good from a German author is called You Should Have Left. It's a novella by a guy called Daniel Kellman.
I love that book.
I thought it was terrific.
There's a little tiny thing, but
are we
Nobody
breaking
got
up?
What was that, Philip? I think you need to repeat that.
oh, I just said I love that book. It's a very slim book, almost a novella, but it packs a punch. It's brilliant.
Interesting title.
It's sort of like House of Leaves light.
Okay.
And Ramsey, everything Ramsey writes, I jump on. In fact, I've started his. Just as I was waiting to come on, I started his new novella, The Booking, which is excellent, quintessential Ramsey Campbell. Yeah, there's just been so many good new authors and so many good single author collections. It almost seemed that every month to be somebody would come along with a new collection and so forth. And right back from I think when Laird Barron's the Imago sequence kind of onwards, it's almost been like a never-ending momentum, and long may it continue. I mean, I struggle to keep up. I struggle to read them all. I do my best. I read quite a lot of non-fiction and I research books. I read literary fiction, I read all kinds of things, but just keeping up with kind of quality weird and quality cosmic horror, both in the US and then the British horror. I'm spoilt for choice. I mean, we live in a very interesting and a very productive time. At least kind of aesthetically, it's fascinating what people are coming out with and how they're exploring the field and expanding it and bringing in their influences. And horror is it's so varied now. It's so diverse.
And I realize it's
a great
kind of
time
a loaded. Yeah, I realize it's also kind of a loaded question to ask anyone in this field, because inevitably there's people that you really admire that get left out, in a question like that. And if you're asked the question tomorrow, you might come up with additional names or different names, just so.
Oh yeah, there's so many, and I regularly kind of do what I can on Goodreads and in social media. I always share my enthusiasms when I come across something that I really like.
Before we let you go here in a few minutes, I want to just get back to a question from one of the Easing followers, Michael DeBronzo. You answered his first question about the movie adaptation of the Ritual, but his second question was, in regards to the novel, The Ritual, would Adam have any interest in returning to that story's world? How the novel and movie ends is perfect for me, but the antagonist and setting would be interesting to explore further in other stories. Thanks. So,
well, thank you for wanting more. It's odd. I have so many ideas for books, and they take me so long to finish. They're almost stacked like planes trying to land. And I worked out recently that just the kind of ideas that I'd like to take to novel length, I worked out just for the ones I've had now. I'm 49 now. I would be 65 by the time I'd finished these. So, and I kind of always move on from the last book and try and do something different, even if I'm writing it in a different way, or some new subject compels me, to write about it. There is a slight connection between all of the books, but I've not thought of writing a sequel. It's strange. The one that I've just finished, and it took quite a long. I started at the very end of 2016. I've only just finished it now. As I was writing it, I thought of a sequel for it, but I've now started the first draft. It's early days of a new book, but it's something else that was more compelling than trying to write a sequel. I thought maybe I should write something in a kind of a shared world with the same characters, at least do 2 books. But already, you know, I've digressed into a new book. And if I start a book, I never give up on one. I will always see it through. I've wanted to give up on everything that I've started at some point. But I'm quite stubborn, quite bloody minded, really, when it comes to finishing a book. I suppose my worry is if I gave up on one, you then set a precedent, and it's too easy to give up on things. And it tends to take me a year to 15 months to 18 months to finish a book, and that's you know, writing more or less full time with a bit of Ritual Limited stuff I do now. Also, the circumstances with which I wrote the Ritual, I couldn't possibly replicate, nor how I was feeling at that time. Particularly homicidal, I think.
Good to know. You're in England, right? So we're safe.
In the southwest of England, yeah. Well, it was an odd one because things were going from bad to worse at work, and I was a dead man walking, you know,
Yeah.
and I knew my time was nearly up. And I worked such long hours. I rarely left my desk before 7. I'd often leave at 8. And I'd get home, and between 10 and midnight, I started this book, which originally was titled Children of the Beast, which my publisher didn't like. They said it was too heavy metal. And I thought, well, what do you want from me? That's a bad thing. So it was originally titled Children of the Beast, and it was going to be a book about men. And it was an experiment because there's an interview with Cormac McCarthy where he was asked, you know, what he writes about. And he said he writes about life and death because there's nothing more important. And it gave me this idea, can I write a novel in which each page is a matter of life and death for the characters, but it wouldn't deaden the reader? Somehow, is there any way of maintaining the suspense and tension without it going flat? So it would start from the very first paragraph. It starts at a moment of crisis, and from then on, it just gets worse for the characters. So it was kind of an experiment, and I didn't have a publisher. This was pre-Pan Macmillan days. And I also wanted to write it in a kind of cinematic, filmic style, and also wanted the language to kind of be really pared down as these characters were trying to survive in the wilderness. Their kind of consciousness would change. So I set myself a lot of ambitious goals for that book. And it took me a couple of years to finish. I can't even remember what the question was. Have I just rambled on again?
No, you're fine.
So,
Pete, you had a question.
Well, yeah, we had talked about how with the end of the movie and even with the end of the book, now that I've gotten through it, and it's a great book.
Oh, thank you.
That the horror is just beginning. I mean, one commenter was looking for a sequel, but this guy's going to be rescued, and he's going to have to explain.
Well, in the novel, you don't know. I mean, he's naked.
Yeah.
He has a serious head injury. He's hallucinating. He's walking through a boulder field. And
he might not make it.
He just lets go of everything.
Yeah.
He almost
hits
this Buddhist nirvana through his suffering, his travails. And I just thought, people emailed me and said, does he survive? And I put a little, what do they call them? Not cookies. What are they called when you leave a clue in another book?
Easter egg.
Easter egg.
Nerd alert.
There's an Easter egg in Last Days about what happened to the ritual, because Kyle, the documentary filmmaker, Kyle Freeman, the lead character in Last Days, made a documentary about what happened to the hikers.
Oh, wow.
It's
That's
just
perfect.
dropped in. It's just one sentence. He made one about the metalcore scene called shredding, and I think he made one about black metal called Raining in Hell, and one about British backpackers who went missing under the Arctic Circle. And by that, if they made a film about it and he helped them, then Luke must have survived.
Philip, did you just say nerd alert when we said Easter egg?
I said nerd alert.
Yeah, that's what I thought you said.
Because we all said Easter egg at the same time, like a bunch of bunch of geeks. Easter egg.
So Adam, in the ritual in the book, I keep thinking it's Lovecraftian. I keep thinking it's Lovecraftian, and there's only one possible. There's one use of black goat in the woods. Is that your one nod to Lovecraft?
Yeah, I mean it's I suppose a sense of love, a sense of Lovecraftian cosmic horror. I deliberately hope to evoke it within that book, and that particular Lovecraftian deity tied into this Finnish mythology of Ylapukki, the Yule goat, and all kinds of references to these kind of horned creatures in Scandinavian mythology. And then the other part of it, which no one ever mentions, is Arthur Machen's The White People.
Right.
Yeah.
They're in it as well. So it was creating this, I suppose, isolated, cut off, supernormal entity that to my mind, was passing between one world and another at certain times. I mean, there were things I would like to have seen filmed, like the fact that the elderly woman was a hybrid, and the things in the attic were hybrids. Right. You know, there had been some sort of intermingling of humans, and were these things gods or what? I left that open to. I left that enigmatic to try and suggest far more than I described. But it was a kind of, I suppose, Lovecraft, Algernon Blackwood, and Arthur Machen were my were the writers that inspired that book and that setting.
One of the things I do like is this sort of the band has this assumption that this is going to be Odin or Wotan, and he's going to come down and he's going to do everything they want him to do, and they're going to be part of the whole thing. And at some point in the book, the old woman is just like, that she's letting them do this because she's going to get something out of it. But whether their interpretation is right is really never made clear.
Yeah, that was one of the discussions I had with the screenwriter, and a couple of people kind of, I noticed in reviews, questioned that, but I wanted to sort of suggest a vulnerability to what was there, in that it was the last of its type, and the last sort of barely able-bodied family member was the elderly woman. So they were in an incredibly vulnerable position, and they weren't invulnerable. She was almost defenseless, and had suffered this essentially home invasion from a group of people that believed in Moda and believed it was there and had heard something. So she kind of used Luke to get rid of them, identified something in him, some complete desperation at the end of himself. so she was trying to survive and protect what it was that she served.
Can you talk about what's coming out next, Adam?
Well, I've finished this book, and you know, we're talking to a couple of publishers right now, and I would hope that the next novel comes out next year. So this will be my first year since 2010, when I actually won't have a book. Just everything with the ritual and me doing Hasty for the Dark last year, I just haven't had the capacity. I hoped that I could write a novella and do it through Ritual Limited this year, but I haven't had the capacity. So next year, I'm hoping will be the next novel, and then the one that I've just started would be in, what would that be, 2020.
Guys, any more questions for Adam before we let him go?
Is there a name for the new novel, Adam, or is there a one paragraph, 2 sentence summary you can offer?
I will say at this point that it's very much it's a folk horror novel set in rural coastal southwest, in the southwest of the UK where I live, which is the second largest county in England, but the most sparsely populated, and it's unspoiled, a lot of it, quite wild, quite remote. So it's very much has a folk horror element. So probably closer to the Ritual than my other books. But the title is quite talismanic, a little superstitious, because it's going to be a while until this comes out. I'm going to keep that under my hat, but it's very much supernatural horror, and sort of folk and pagan horror again.
All right, looking forward to it. Again, Adam LG Nevill, NEVILL.com, and you can get a free book. And yeah, be sure to check out all of Adam's books. I think almost all of them are on Amazon, except the first one, if I have that right. Amazon US. Thanks for being on the show, Adam. Really appreciate it. It was great talking with you.
Well, thanks for having me on, and for all of the interest and the kind words. I'm sorry if I've rambled on a bit.
It's a successful podcast when the guest rambles on for a bit. That's a successful podcast. So we want to hear what you have to say.
It's been awesome.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. We've got a few more things to talk about. You're welcome to exit and go to bed. I know it's late where you're at, or you're welcome to stay. Either one. So,
what are the subjects? It's 12:30 now, actually. What I've got to do tomorrow, which is completely dull, is today I've spent cleaning all the woodwork in the garden. It's covered. We've had a really wet winter, and everything's covered in this like green lichen. At least I hope the winter is responsible for the green lichen. But I've had to scrub it off today.
Yeah,
and repaint things. And tomorrow I'm staining a deck. So every muscle in my back is screaming at the moment. I should probably lie down. But
my prescription for you is 2 ibuprofen and 3 beers, and go to bed
or more.
Yeah. So I should probably bail out and get some sleep. But thanks very much for having me on.
Thank you. Really appreciate you coming on.
And this goes out on audio Monday.
Tomorrow, be afternoon tomorrow, U.S. time. So
wonderful.
So, and I'll send you that link as soon as it's out.
Okay. Well, I'll say cheerio and thanks to everyone who's checked in.
Thanks, you.
Adam.
Thanks, Adam.
Cheers, Adam.
Take care. Bye then.
Bye. Well, I'll tell you, my first question is this: what happened with Fahrenheit 451? I mean to say, what the hell happened with the Fahrenheit 451 film?
I would wager a guess that whoever adapted that read the description of the film from the back of a book and then ran with it, because I didn't feel like they touched on anything about what that film or what that story was really about.
No, they completely changed the character of Clarice. It just wow. You got a classic here, guys. Okay, let's not go with the plot with this great classic book. Let's change it.
Did you finish it? Did you finish the film? Because I actually cut it off about halfway through and said I can't anymore.
Sadly, I did finish the film. Yeah, and it was. What's the deal with the bird? I mean, that's just stupid. Did you see it? Did you see it, Pete?
No.
Philip?
No, I've seen enough bad movies this weekend.
Yeah, me too.
No.
I watched the trailers for it. I watched the previews and for it, and I was like, that looks like a train wreck. And I could just tell just by the way the trailers looked, that wasn't.
Well, as you know, I'm a huge Ray Bradbury fan, so I had high hopes, and especially since Michael Shannon was in it.
Yeah, the actors they had these two amazing actors to work with, and I think the director, I can't remember who the director was, but his last movie I think was pretty good.
The two leads just came off of Black Panther and Shape of Water. It's just like, this has got to be.
And part of me wonders if when the movie. I'm very curious when the movie was made, because I wonder if it was made recently or if it was something they had been sitting on for a while. Because I find it very hard to believe that Michael Jordan would do that kind of a film, riding the wave he's riding right now. But
that's a good point. You're talking about an HBO film rather than a theatrical film.
Or yeah, exactly. Especially an HBO film that looked, that didn't seem to have its shit together, as it were.
Yeah.
All right. Well, in another case of absolute stupendously stupid things, the superhero prequels are getting a little bit out of control. They're going to have an Alfred Pennyworth prequel.
What?
No, they're not.
No, I'm not making this up. Epix picked it up for 10 episodes.
FX. Okay, so here's
not FX. Epix. EPIX.
EPIX. What is
I
that?
don't know who they are. No.
Okay.
But yeah, no, this is not a rumor.
All right.
So wasn't that in Gotham? I never even saw Gotham.
It'll be a different actor, for whatever that's worth.
That's not worth much, because he's the best part of Gotham. Well, he was the best part of the idea of Gotham. It turned out they didn't use him well either.
Yeah, DC Comics just made the announcement. You're right, Mike. I thought you had been fooled, but apparently you are.
Somebody
correct.
get me a brick wall so I can fucking bang my head against it.
Well, I mean, look at what's happening with Solo when you talk about the fact that it's like people like, look, guys, it's time to move on. At least for a decade. Let's move on.
I'm going to see it tonight.
Well,
then we can't talk about it.
You're the only one, I guess, because it's.
Well, no, Rick's seeing it right now. That's why
I saw it yesterday in an empty theater.
Was it any good?
I wouldn't see it again.
There you go.
Was it Last Jedi bad, or was it just?
I will fight all of you on The Last Jedi. I loved it.
You're wrong.
No,
one of the problems I had with prequels for movies about main characters is that you can't build any suspense.
Right.
Well, right.
We know he's not going to die because we've seen him die already.
It's the Titanic.
Okay, but what movie do you go in thinking the hero's going to die? That's a stupid argument.
But
don't be stupid.
Don't put him into stupid situations where
our new slogan.
Well, yeah, but now they have Boba Fett.
Don't be stupid.
They're thinking about making Boba Fett into a movie, and God, I don't know. I think Disney's got to slow down or figure it out or go back to the drawing board or something. Last two movies have stunk.
Okay, just a complete aside. It's being reported all over the place. Gardner Dozois has died.
What? Who's that?
The editor for Year's Best Science Fiction and Asimov's.
Oh, really? I don't know if that's not good.
So
That's too bad.
Well,
Speaking
thanks for that news.
Well, I guess that's on the
Jesus.
heels of talking about the death of Solo in the
Right.
theaters. We can get right in. That just
Everything.
segued right into this poor gentleman's
All right,
passing.
let's talk
Everything
about something.
seems
Let's
not
talk
that
about something
important
good.
Super inappropriate comment by me.
what do you want to talk about? Good.
I want to talk about something good.
Let's not talk about death for a few minutes.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's have a minute to pause and consider that we all could die at any moment.
I'm dying
especially
right now.
especially Pete at
Yes.
his age.
Absolutely.
Now,
Oh, can we talk about the
as
outsider?
everybody knows, we do a Lovecraft Zine movie night, or as some people know, I should say, at 10 p.m. Eastern. Well, Rabbit was having problems last night. We used Rabbit to watch it, and so we couldn't fix it. So I had to say, okay, we'll just watch a movie next Saturday night. So the movie was Pie Wacket, and I thought I've spent $7 on this, so I need to watch it.
The movie's what? Pie Wacket?
Pie Wacket, Pyewacket.
Huh.
It's available on Amazon to rent. Anyway, so I watched it with Danielle and Logan, with all the lights off, of course. I'll tell you what, man, that's a movie that knows how to build suspense. It is a good movie.
Pie
A
Wacket.
really good movie. And I really don't want to say very much about it and ruin it for anybody, but I'd say watch it.
As good as The Girl with All the Gifts,
Oh
or
my god.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
So the girl with all the gifts. This is what's weird about that. I didn't want to be. I didn't want to. One. I didn't want to make Adam's interview. I didn't want to interrupt his thing. But what's interesting about that is that, my understanding is that was a short story, which was then reprinted in a Year's Best by Ellen Datlow. And then on the strength of the short story, he got a deal to write it into a novel. And then, but then Kelly was saying that he wrote it as a screenplay, and then the screenplay. So he wrote the movie. So I don't know what the order was there, but I know that it was that story has been a short story, a screenplay, a novel, and a movie.
short story, novel to screenplay,
And then must have been, yeah.
and then.
But it's an interesting. I mean, I think one of the things that Adam was talking about was the recent upsurge in horror, and I think a lot of it has to do with the success of a lot of the movies that have been coming out recently, and most of them Stephen King, but also with things like The Conjuring and those Annabelle and all that sort of stuff, and of course,
Conjuring was great. Yeah.
right, and it's got a bit of a cyclical effect, which is the popularity of the movies is driving people to write more books, and the books are being optioned, and the publishers are buying the books because the movies are doing so well. So it's been an interesting time, and it makes me wonder. I don't know if it's a chicken or who's the chicken and who's the egg, but horror right now is being driven sort of by both this popularity and success of films, and that's driving the publishing market as well. So it's a really it's sort of a good time right now to be in the horror game. And
those films are coming out of sort of left field.
Yeah, they're not all adaptations. A lot of them are original. Yeah,
stories. And here's one of the things I really loved about what Adam said. He wrote horror back when he started to write horror back when this was not true. It was just what he wanted to write. In other words, he didn't try to ride some wave.
Right. Like I'm doing.
It's a lesson for any writer. Just write what's inside you.
Mm-hmm.
And go from there.
Yeah.
What I loved was that he described himself as now I can't remember, supernatural horror author instead of a weird horror, or what I'd really like to see is everybody who writes horror just describing themselves as a horror author. I've railed on this forever that I'm tired of all the categories and everything like that. If it's a good book, it should just be a good book, and if it's a good book in the genre of horror, then who cares if it's quiet or weird or any of that?
So in other words, it's not you saying that we need to call things the new weird.
No, that would
I
not
thought
be
that was
me.
you.
Can I
No.
just jump back to one thing Adam said that blew my mind? It shouldn't
Sure.
have blown my mind, but there was so much to unpack in that interview. What a great interview! But he never gives up on a book.
Yeah, that's great.
Jesus, I wish I had that kind of fucking constitution.
And he's even older than you.
No, he's not. I think he's the same age as me.
Oh, well, there you go.
Let's be clear, he never gives up on writing a book.
Right.
Right. Not reading, but yes.
Well, that's what I meant, is that I have so many unfinished screenplays that, sometimes that I thought should have just been finished that I just did not have the willpower to continue on with, mostly because I know it's just a form of procrastination that I haven't been able to get over, but I'll get a different idea that seems better in the middle of a script, and that one interests me more, so I'll go on to write half of that and then move on to the other thing, which probably explains why very few of my things have been made.
I've recently had to not bail on projects, but set projects aside for other projects, and it's just a lot of it comes down. I mean, Adam's in not a unique position, but a unique position in the sense of percentages of people who get to that position, which is that he can spend a year and a half writing a novel, and he doesn't have a whole lot of distractions. I think there are a lot of the writers working today, like for me, I have to balance between my day job and between I'm a screenwriter, so I'm if an opportunity comes in to write a screenplay, I have to set aside everything else. If I get invited to an anthology that I really want to be in, I'm going to write a story for that, and that takes time. So you find yourself picking up and putting down projects quite a bit. It's a bit of a juggling act. And one of the things I wanted to ask him, we ran out of time, but I did want to ask him how he juggles short stories, because he does write a lot of short stories as well as novels, and how he prioritizes that workload. But it's tricky, man. I mean, it's a great blessing to be in a position where you can just work on a project for a year and not have to have a lot of distractions. But I think for most people, it's a lot of balancing. There's a lot of balancing to be done.
It sounds like he was saying that he had a day job also, that he sometimes left the office at 10 and wrote from 10 to midnight or something like that.
He had the day job when he wrote The Ritual. Yeah,
I'll tell you.
Yeah.
That is something I'm looking forward to. I've got 8 years left on the day job until I can retire.
Jesus, you're not even going to live that long.
Yeah.
That's the worst part.
Hey, several people
my inference, by the way, was not like negative about Adam saying that. My point is that that's like the dream for is to be able to just really have that, that time to really sit and focus on a project.
Right. I didn't feel like you were doing that. I felt like you were making excuses for your own life.
I thought you were insulting Adam, and I was going to email him about it privately.
Well,
no, it is sort of something I'm looking forward to is to, being able to sit down on a project and commit myself to it, knowing that I don't have to stop.
You just got to get rid of the kids.
Well, yeah.
Except on Sundays from 6 to 8 your time.
But in 8 years they'll be in college. Oh God, please.
At least, I'd shoot for out of the house, and if the college is
there, you go. There you go.
Better.
Votech, maybe.
Hey, Votech is fine. Have you seen what plumbers make?
Hey, I wanted to show you guys these really quickly. For those who are watching on video, these are Adam's Ritual Limited publications. I apologize for the glare.
So was that Some Will Not Sleep cover the one that was too scary for Amazon?
Yeah, this is the one that was too scary for Amazon, which I don't understand at all. But
it's a great cover, but how do they make an arbitrary?
But if you take the jacket
like
off,
that?
Look at that. That's the hardcover itself.
There are a lot more, quote, scarier covers on Amazon than that.
But the boards are printed, and then look at these end papers. I mean, they're gorgeous.
Yeah, those are gorgeous.
And these are all numbered and signed, so there's only 300 of each. So these are, and there's the other one. So these are still available. Which I find shocking. But you can go to his website through his website. Yeah, you can buy them through his website. He's
just the Kindle of those. Maybe I should pony up for those hardcovers.
Meanwhile, I'm surprised that there's not a hardcover of this, of the Ritual.
The only hardcovers that he has, besides that aren't limited or whatever, the trade hardcovers that he has are House of Small Shadows and No One Gets Out Alive, which I have the hardcovers of.
That's right, crying for a signed limited edition treatment.
Yeah. I want to talk about several books that have been sent to me over the past few months that I have not had time to talk about. Just briefly, All That Withers by John Palisano. God, John, I hope I'm saying your last name correctly. I have not had a chance to read this collection yet, but I've read John's stories before, so I have no doubt that this is very good. So if you're looking for something to read, maybe check that out, see if it interests you. Darkest Hours by Mike Thorne. He sent that to me as well. And he's got some great blurbs on the back. Well, S.P. Muskowski likes it, so it's got to be good.
What's the title again, Mike?
Darkest Hours by Mike Thorne. Thorn.
Oh, yeah.
No E at the end.
SP's right there on the cover.
And yeah, that's it for now, except to show you guys this.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
The reprint of The Conspiracy Against the Human Race. And it's got a new, I believe it's new, preface by Legati. So anyway, yeah, looks real good. Pretty cool cover, isn't it?
Yeah, I've got that whatever the last edition was, the black and white.
Yeah.
Small publisher edition, I guess.
Yeah, me too.
I can't remember who originally published it. I can't even remember. It was some small indie. Well, good for him. I mean, it's good Legati's getting that kind of. I guess Penguin's bought up his stash because they're putting all the paperbacks out now.
Yeah.
With Vandermeer doing the intro and what have you.
That was done by Hippocampus.
Oh, there you go, Hippocampus. I'm reading The Outsider.
Yeah, me too.
Man, unputdownable.
Oh, is it?
Is my early review.
Yeah.
I'm about 300 pages in, and I've read all of that in the last 24 hours.
It's King's latest. Is it supernatural horror?
I think it has to be, but I haven't got to the part where they've proved that out yet.
The first couple hundred pages are really kind of more of I would call it a crime book.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
A thriller / crime story. And yeah, I think part of what makes it a page turner is that you spend the first couple hundred pages wondering how King is going to wiggle out of this box he's put himself in as far as the story is concerned, because it seems impossible. And then of course you're just sitting there going, please don't be aliens, dude. Please don't be aliens. Please don't be aliens. Because that seems to be King's go-to solution to most of his problems is like, aliens.
I'm not saying it's aliens, but
it's aliens. So I'm hoping it's not aliens. I don't know yet. I haven't gotten that far, but it does get into supernatural territory for sure. But it's really well written. It's his most, in my opinion, for me anyway, it's been his most compulsive read in quite a very long time.
Great. My TBR pile wasn't high enough.
Yeah, I've been making some progress. I got through 3 books this week.
Nice.
So,
anything you can recommend?
Do you guys hear about this? It's this for those who are just listening. It's a album, CD, music. Well, I guess I don't know what kind of rock it is, but the first song's called "Baron to We Hunt," and he basically goes through all the weird fiction genre people and names them.
Like a Bob Dylan sort of thing, just sort of
yeah, I think so. And then so he sends me a note.
How was that, Phil?
Yeah, sing that, would you? Didn't you?
Dropping the cards.
So it's Mans. How do you Mans Weislander? I'm probably butchered that name. I'm sorry, but thank you for sending this to me. Not song number 9, track number 9. There's a note on here, and he sent me a note through Facebook, if I remember right, that he hoped I didn't mind that he added an interview. So if you listen to the last song, near the end, the last song's called Anti-Survival. And I think you can get this album online. He does like I'm interviewing him, just the start of it. You know, he takes a bit from the podcast, one of the podcasts. So I thought that was cool.
It's cool.
So
I'm a big fan
Yeah.
of, and I mentioned this in a post I made on Facebook recently, because there was a young lady who's going around animating book covers of horror writers, and she did a couple of mine, and she's done a lot of the writers who are sort of in the community, and it's been a lot of fun to see that. And then one of the point of my post was, I think it's really, and I think Paul Tremblay posted recently an original piece of artwork that somebody had done for his book Disappearance at Devil's Rock, and I thought it was really cool. And I think it's really cool what you're describing, which is I love the idea of a creative community interacting with one another and kind of coming up with these different facets, these different explorations of each other's artwork. And I don't know, it's kind of, it's really moving, and it's such a positive thing. And it kind of makes you feel that you wish that there was more of that, and more of people riffing on artwork and less of people bitching about everything constantly. And because that's kind of what I think our community should be focused on. And I'm hoping it's a trend that keeps going in that direction. Because there's a lot of bitching and not enough creative output. People should be.
I have to agree with what you just said. Yeah, when it's stuff like this album, or those animated pictures and so forth, and yeah, that's a great feeling. We need more of that.
I had someone approach me and ask me if they could, use one of my creations and tie their books into mine, and that felt really good.
Yeah, that's cool.
I bet. That's
I
nice.
hope that you said no, of course, because that's all copyright protected. But
Yeah,
still,
right.
it's a beautiful thought.
Fuck no, should have been the answer.
No,
How do you
but
think
God,
you
it made
are?
me feel good that you asked me.
Speaking of collaboration, do you have any of these left, Kelly?
Oh man, yeah. I think there's
It's
maybe
The Ballad of Eric Zahn by Kelly Young.
I have one of those.
I have one of those.
I think
Oh,
mine
thanks,
is signed, or are they all signed?
Yeah, they're all signed. But I think I personalized yours.
I'll
So
have to go check. It's on my shelf.
I think there's probably less than 10 of those left on the website, www.strange-eons.com.
AEONS.
Yeah, there was a limited edition of 99.
For those who can't see, it looks like a record.
Yeah,
And
you got to
then-
open it up. It's
It
pretty
looks
cool.
like a 45.
Yeah, fold
Right,
up.
looks like a 45, and then you pull it out. It's a book.
Yeah, I tried to play mine on my record player. That didn't go well.
Oof. Ouch.
Yeah. Well, live and learn.
Right.
Some people have to touch the hot stove several times before they learn.
The real reason to pick that up is not for me. It is for the really cool artwork in there by Rob Corliss.
It is it's great. Yeah. And I agree with not picking it up because of you too.
Right. I thought you might.
I just picked up John Padgett's album. Secrets.
I wanted to grab one of those. That
got
looked
one of
cool.
the- I got
I
one
wanted
of the
to shout
yellow
out about
vinyls.
that too. Where did you get it? And talk about it. It's amazing.
Cadabra, I think. Is the
Cadabra
Yeah.
name?
Records. Yeah.
Cadabra
Cadabra
Records,
Records. So I bought it right off of their website when John was posting about it. I think there was a limited edition of yellow vinyls that went out. Some people had some really crazy cool black and yellow swirl vinyl. I don't know who
Yeah.
got that, but I didn't get that cool one. I just got it, but mine's pretty sweet. It's yellow vinyl, and it's got a Legati flat in it, where Legati, I think, just wrote like a little intro, I guess, to the story. I actually haven't read it, so I don't know exactly what it is because I just got it yesterday and I haven't been able to look at all yet. But it's really neat, and I'm excited to listen to it. And again, it's just there's something, and Adam touched on it during the interview. There's something neat about the indie press world, and some of these passion projects are really like, man, they're just mind blowing. Like, who thinks to do that? And it's just such a cool item to have, and it looks great. It looks very it looks completely professional, and even and I can't wait to listen to it. But I think if you go to Cadabra Records or Google Cadabra Records John Padgett, or I would assume if you just if John has a website or a Facebook page, you can go to that too. I'm sure there's links.
And to your point about bitching and about how cool stuff like this is, I think that sometimes indie publishers are easy targets, but we need to remember what kind of passion goes into what they're doing, and they go into these projects not knowing if they're going to make a dime back, but they invest their money and their time because they want to see this out there in the world, whatever it may be, whether it's John Padgett's record or a book, or this album from Mans.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I
mean, nobody's getting paid to write these short stories. Obviously, it's like in the movies world, you write a spec script and you pray that it gets made. But the hours and the effort that are put into creating this art, you don't know for sure, that's if it's ever going to see the light of day, or if you're ever going to make a dime on it. And if you do, you make any money, you're probably making close to a dime. It's never for the money. It's always for the love of creating what you're creating, which I think is why it's so fun to see when people engage with it, whether it be readers or other artists. I think it's really fulfilling.
I know we're going a little over 2 hours, but I want to ask Kelly and anyone else, if you guys have watched The Terror, what did you think of the ending of The Terror with no spoilers?
Well, I didn't see the ending, so I think 4 episodes in, I think.
Did you see the ending? I know you saw the ending, Philip.
No, I only got to 4
I'm sorry, Kelly.
Yeah.
Kelly.
Yes. Yeah.
No, I'm the handsome one.
I was pretty satisfied with it. I would have to kind of jump back into the book and see if that's how the book ended. I can't remember if it ended that way or not, but
it didn't.
Okay. I was still pretty satisfied with it.
Is it a one season? Is it just
like
it's a limited series?
10 episodes, yeah.
Okay. Oh, so it's just the book all the way. There's not going to be like a second season. That's good to know. I kind of assumed it was a thing.
Yeah, no.
I'd sure like to see more of that, where a company just says, look, I'm going to take this and I'm going to adapt it and I'm going to make it, what it is. That was what killed Under the Dome, was them saying, oh, we're going to take the idea of this novel and then we'll stretch it out and expand upon it and all that shit. It was just like, let's just see an adaptation of the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am a member of audible.com, as I'm sure many people are. And I recently, with a credit, I got Ghost Stories by, is it E.F. Benson? Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, E.F. Benson. Read by Mark Gatiss of Sherlock fame. I hadn't read this story in so many years, but one of the stories he reads is the room in the tower, and that, you guys remember that story? That is one scary story.
I have really, that book. I don't have the audio. I had that book though.
Yeah, well, I recommend this if you're a member of Audible. Just look up E.F. Benson and Ghost Stories, I suppose. But it's without any spoilers. You find this out right away. It's about this guy who keeps having this dream his whole life about being at a dinner party, and at the end of the dinner, someone says to him, Jack will see you to your room. I've given you the room in the tower. You know, so I won't say anything else about it, but it's very well written and read by Mark Gaddis really adds an extra dimension to it. So
I know that name, but you said of Sherlock fame, but who was he in Sherlock?
Sherlock's brother.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Who's also the showrunner for what, Doctor Who and Sherlock for a while?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Well, if you like,
I just finished the first season of Lost in Space.
how was it?
I personally loved it.
I enjoyed it. I you know
A lot
what?
of fun.
I not only enjoyed it, I enjoyed it with my kids.
It's well acted. The effects are good. It has its couple, it has its clunky moments like any show will, but it creates some real adrenaline and some real. A lot of the shows are based on the idea. A lot of the episodes are based on the idea of them. There's a lot of ticking clocks going on. So there's a lot of like high drama tension. How they're going to get out of this situation? How are we getting out of this situation? And there's a lot of that going on. So it's really fun. I think there's one episode where it was really kind of a drag. I think the third episode was a bit of a drag, but for the most part, it's very entertaining. I would highly recommend watching it.
All right. Well, we have a prize generously donated by writer Alan Baxter.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah, he's giving away his latest cosmic horror novel, Hidden City. So if you'd like to be in the random drawing for this prize, send an email to lovecraftian prizes.
I have it right here.
Yeah, that looks good. lovecraftian@gmail.com and put Hidden City in the subject of the email, and whatever else you want to say in the body of the email, if anything. On that note, if you enjoy the podcast, we do like hearing from you. The main email address is lovecraftian@gmail.com. If you do like the podcast, send an email there, lovecraftian@gmail.com. If you don't, or you have criticisms, send an email to Kelly. What's your email address?
It's fuck you at www.fuckyou.com.
Okay, let me write that down.
I don't think that's correct.
Well, I think you misspelled it there. It's with two Ks.
As Alan Baxter, very quickly to pimp him, he has a book called The Book Club, which just came out on PS Publishing. It came out, I think, last year. PS Publishing put it out, but that's an excellent little story. It's a novel. It's a novella, but he's a great writer. I like his stuff. He's a lot of fun.
Yeah, Alan Baxter is an Australian writer. Correct me if I'm wrong. We've had him on the show.
Don't hold it against him. From Australia.
Really great writer. I mean, really great writer.
Yeah, does good work for sure.
So I'm flattered that he's given away a book. So, well, I think that's it. Anything else, guys? Paul Tremblay will be on the show next week.
Nice.
So, yeah, and then after that, we had to. I think it's my illness last week. We rescheduled Steve Raznick Tim. Am I saying his name right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Raznick Tim for 2 weeks from now. So I'm looking forward to both of those interviews. All right. Thanks, guys. Great interview with Adam Nevill.
Yeah, that might have been one of my favorites of the last couple.
Yeah.
Let me say it for the millionth time. I really admire people who are immensely talented like him, who are also nice, kind, humble people, as he seems to be.
Not like Kelly.
Or any of us on this podcast, to be honest.
When 20 seconds.
I don't know about that. I'm the most humble person you will ever meet. There's no one more humble than me.
I am humble as shit, so.
My middle name is Humble Pie. I will say very quickly, 10-second anecdote. Adam, before I was published, when I wrote Mother, which was my first publication.
4, 3, 2, 1.
I sent the story to Adam blindly, cold. And I had not published anything at the time. Notice I just keep going over you guys.
Yeah, keep talking. Keep
You
talking.
know why?
No,
Because
we're listening. Really,
You know why? Because the listeners care. The listeners care.
Yeah, they do.
Mhm.
They do.
Anyway,
And Adam said what? Don't quit your day job?
he said, "Don't quit your day job." But I thought the fact that he even replied was really sweet. No, he was he complimented the story. He said, "Keep going." He gave me ideas for expanding it. He blurbed it, and that's how nice a guy he is. To Mike's point, that's
The moral of
kind
this
guy he
story is all you young writers out there, send your stories
do
cold to
that.
Philip Fracassi, and
His email
you'll get
address is.
you'll also get something warm and inviting as a response, I'm sure.
You know,
Philip is dumbstruck right now.
That email again is PFUTKK.
I work a lot of hours.
I think we just lost Philip on the podcast.
Can't.
and every viewer.
Yeah.
Well, let's finish
Patreon
up.
numbers are going down as we speak.
You know, for all the writers out there, here's the last thing I'll say, and then we'll sign off. For all the writers out there, you know, I found it very inspiring. I think any writer or any creative person would find it really inspiring. The way that Adam just kept on and on and on, never giving up, you know, till it happened for him. You know, that's the one thing you can't do is give up.
Even when he was depressed and knowing he was losing his job and was under a shitload of stress, he kept writing that novel.
So the moral of the story is never give up, never surrender.
It's that the weak will be removed from the equation and the strong will continue.
Well, you know, it sounds
Is that
so.
what you're saying, Mike?
What I'm saying is, it sounds so simple, but if you do it, you'll succeed. You know, notice what you're doing wrong. You know, get advice from people. Notice what you're doing wrong and what you're doing right, and correct it as you need to. But don't stop. Don't give up. So.
And he went back to school because he wanted to become even a better writer than he was, and he went back to school to get technical stuff done. And when he wanted to do his publishing company, he took a year off writing to get his publishing company up and running. The guy's impressive. I mean, definitely, in all seriousness, to have that kind of drive is what it's all about. You have to keep going, and that's the key. I think I agree with you. That's the biggest thing. You have to keep doing it, to persevere.
Yeah. I think to sum it up, don't stop believing. Hold on to that feeling. Streetlights, people. Whoa.
And
Don't stop thinking about tomorrow.
And you know, people who need Philip. I'm going to edit that out.
What the hell are you guys talking about?
People who need people
are the luckiest people in the world.
Luckiest.
Are we still live? Is
this is why we're free, and
this is part of the podcast?
We're doing the after show.
Aren't you supposed to drop flyers before you bomb?
This is what you don't get to see. All right. Well,
true colors.
Yeah. Well, you didn't name names and bitch about anybody yet, so.
They're shining through.
All right. Number one, thanks to you guys for being part of the podcast every week. I really do appreciate it, all kidding aside. Thank you to all the listeners. Please spread the word. One of the best things you can do that doesn't cost you a dime is leave us a review on iTunes, because iTunes really drives a lot of traffic, even if you yourself aren't listening on iTunes per se. And then last, thank you to all the patrons. I think I got 88 patrons right now, and I can honestly say if it was not for you guys, the Lovecraft Easing probably would not be around any longer. You keep it happening, so thank you. If you want to join the Patreon, there you get a lot of cool stuff. The latest was Pete Rollick talking about unreliable narrators, and no joke, all kidding aside, in all seriousness, it's probably the most fascinating thing that I've ever heard Pete talk about. It was really, really interesting.
Doesn't seem
So.
that hard.
Oh, shucks. No.
It's a low bar.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Next week we got Paul Tremblay, and we'll see you then. Thanks.